Hello and welcome to our At the Heart of It podcast, episode 3. I've been reminded by Chris that it is. I lose track of things. Now, we're going to go through some questions with Chris, but I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. And Chris is going to pipe in at any time, but we're also going to go through some questions that relate to that with Chris as well. And he's going to give us some answers. And sometimes his answers are,
A little bit long and detailed.
and why is that, Chris?
Well, I'm sort of I like specifics, and I feel as though the more detailed I am, the better the impression or understanding of it comes across.
And
But
that's
perhaps that's just because I'm that type of person. I'm a very detailed person.
Yes. And I can see that through the artwork that you have done through your life is very detailed.
Yes.
So what I wanted to come through and pipe in at any time is, looking through the male side when it comes to relationships and where there's a woman who, um, maybe blaming you for how she feels or that sort of stuff. So it's coming in that context. But what I want to do is just imagine a boy, who grows up being told things like, and you can relate to this if it pipe in if it does, that you don't cry, that you be tough, that you don't talk about your feelings, that you are told to sort it out yourself, and that you don't make a fuss about things.
Yes, and even to the point where um, if you're a mistake, if you were back in the old days, there was no identifications of ADHD or these common things that are out now. You might have had slight autism, but back in those days, it was snap out of it, grow up, you're nonsense, just wake up, and all these sorts of things. I don't know whether anybody ever, is old enough to remember back the classic old grabbing by the scruff and like, snap out of it, just grow up. Don't be thinking like that or whatever. So you were suppressed in that sort of thinking.
Yeah, and you just brought up a memory of me when you're talking about old enough. In my schooling, I went to a tech college full of boys. There were 600 boys to 100 girls, and one of the people in my class, lovely guy, was doing exactly what you said. And the immediate reaction of what the teacher did in this metalworking class with those great big tables with vices all on them is he literally leaped over the table, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, pulled him across the table. He's a 14 or 15-year-old boy, and basically did that to him and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck.
I know. So when you explain that now, it seems horrid and having, but that actually did work. It actually did. When you look back on it, it actually did take your subconscious mind into reality of how things, are a norm or supposed to be a norm, and it did. It really did. But you can't do that now.
No,
So
no,
people
but
are let to go, and then there's all these. Oh, he got ADHD. No, he just needed to snap out of it when he was young.
yeah, and now we're actually recognizing it, which is a good thing because we can understand it more. And back
Yes.
then, that boy being dragged across the table would have actually been very misunderstood for what was going through for him. And he was told right then, whatever's going on in your head or mind, you've got to snap out of it, and you can't.
Yeah, and although I say a lot of people did snap out of it, but there were legitimate people that just were born with whatever you know um, dysfunctions they had going on. There were people like that, um, and in a case suppressing that mightn't have been a good thing,
Mm.
but you don't know.
You don't, not at the time at all, and the teachers that we had at the time as well. So continuing on to the story, so we told all this stuff, don't make a fuss, sort it out yourself. So he learns how to hide his feelings. As a boy, he learns to stay quiet when he's sad or scared. He learns to shut down when things get too big. He learns that if he shows emotions, he might actually get in trouble or he might actually look weak.
That's right, because it was all about manhood. It's all about being a man, and men don't do that. Men don't cry, men don't do this, men don't show emotion, and they wonder why men just want to go to their shed.
That's it. So, in this story, by the time the boy becomes a man, he's really good at not saying much. So he's learnt that skill really well. He keeps
Very
everything
well.
inside because that's what he was taught.
Yes.
He thinks, this is what makes him a good man.
Yes. Yes, you do. And that's the role you had to be. You didn't know any different, didn't know any better. Okay, this is how I've got to be according to the grown-up society
Mhm.
around me who were teaching me these things, who did not know any better themselves when they were a kid, when they
That's
were
right.
young. That's what you get taught is what they got taught,
Mhm.
how things to be.
And
Until
yes.
until these actual legality rules came in where you can't slap your child on the bottom or you
Mhm.
know
Mm.
call them you're an idiot for dropping that cup. Oh, because that's going to affect me.
Yes, we've definitely, flipped it as time's gone on, and seeing that within a 50-year range is actually quite good. But when we talk about this story, there's that boy, he's learnt all those things, and then he becomes a man, and then he actually gets into a relationship. At first, when he gets into this relationship and they have it, she comes across as being kind and patient and always trying to understand him. And he likes that because it feels safe to him. He doesn't have to say much because she actually fills in all the gaps for him. But as time goes on, she starts asking for more. She wants more talking. She wants more connection. She wants more understanding. She wants more care. And he doesn't actually know how to give it, not because he doesn't want it, but because he was never taught how.
And also, when you just say he doesn't know how to give it, yeah, he doesn't know how to give it, but also it's a realization that he has to do this. This is a thing. This is this is new. Okay, I've got to be a bit more caring towards her. I've got to be a bit more like you care for her. You're her protector. Um, but she needs verbal words. She needs body responses, but body talk to go along with it, and emotion, which is all of a sudden what we aren't used to.
Mm.
You know, over time it becomes an equal an equal. Uh, I forgot the word for it. Can't get the word out. It becomes an equal thing, mediocre and middle thing for it
Yep.
to really work. One can't be overbearing and then the other because that's not going to work. Whichever side's overbearing. But
Yeah.
for men, having that being brought up like that is a crash.
Confronting.
But having said that, back in back then, the women were also brought up to be the housewife. Stay at home, look after it. And I'll just tell you a quick story. A friend of mine who got married, a decade ago. Both of them were young.
Mm.
Um, he was the real working man. He was a real working boy, real male thinking. And he said to me one day, he complained and whinged and bitched to me one day. He says, "Oh God, she's just, I bring my wage home and she just, next thing I've got new curtains. Next thing we've got, well, money's getting wasted through the house and stuff like this." And I said, "Yes, but that's all she's known from her parents, from her mother, watching her mother grow up and do all these, presenting the house. She's nesting. She's married now. She's nesting and doing all that. You're the worker, and you're the one that pays for the white picket fence." And all the luxuries that you want to have in your house. He found that very hard to understand and thought in a way that I was just siding with the women because I'd grown up with three sisters and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't have to grow up with three sisters to understand that and get that.
Mm.
It would have been much different. And I brought this his to attention. Would have been much different if she was spending it on, all her clothes and half a ton of makeup and everything like this. She was buying things for your future home,
And comfort
and comfort. And
and safety.
yes, and he's still with her now and very happy.
That is beautiful to hear. So going back to this story, because I know you went on another story tangent, and because he was never taught how with these emotions, when things get emotional, instead of talking at that point, a man would start to shut down because he doesn't necessarily hasn't been taught how. So when she tries to explain her feelings, he actually gets overwhelmed. And when she gets upset, he feels like he's failing her. So he pulls away. And when she tells him something is wrong, he hears, "You're not good enough."
Yes, yes, in a lot of ways, that's basically it. He because he's totally not used to it. Um, I mean, you can't be saying that towards every male.
No.
A lot of males are different, but overall, it's very confronting.
Yeah.
You know, but it works in the end. Over time, the patients gradually are, happy. There's an old saying amongst men: "Happy wife, happy life."
Oh yeah, I think
And
that's
that,
against women as well, as they say the same thing.
well, when us men, when we say happy life, happy wife, we want to keep the wife happy by even if it's to pretend that we're caring and emotional and all this, because it's not us deep down. So we have to be like that.
We have to learn how to be like that.
Yes,
But
yes.
continuing on to the rest of the story, we'll get through a few of them, is he isn't trying to hurt her. He's trying to protect himself the only way that actually he knows how, by going quiet, going inside, and disappearing emotionally. So that's why you talk about pretending, because sometimes you've got to pretend first before you actually embody how to be that or remember that. So to her, it actually looks like he doesn't care, but to him, it feels like he can't win. So one day, she stops trying. She just goes quiet, and not the soft quiet, the peaceful kind. It's the "I'm done" kind, because she's not getting anything back. So he then might actually panic, and he might think that she's changed, but she didn't actually change. She finally stopped being what we call the version that she performed to keep the relationship going. So that performance is also like pretend as well. But here's the big truth before we go on. He didn't become distant because he's a bad man. He became distant because that's how he learned to survive big feelings. He wasn't ignoring her, he was just overwhelmed. He didn't stop trying because he didn't love her. He stopped trying because he didn't know how to do the emotional part. And he felt like he was always getting it wrong.
Yeah, it's like a paradox thing, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right.
So at the start you have to pretend. You have to pretend to put up this front and to learn with it. Some are very good to be like that for the rest of their lives, where their other partner will think, oh, he's on my level now, a good enough level and everything like this, but he's just learned to pretend really well.
He may have, some of them may have, and some
Some of them may
actually
have,
do.
yeah. As we go through this, we're not talking about every person as a
Right.
whole. People need to realise that lots of people that think like this, and lots of people don't think like this. But at the end of the day, the overall thing is that many growing up used to be one thing,
Yeah.
and for single people like myself, who's never seen our parent with, like, we never had a father, so we weren't influenced by that to see that. People that have growing up with a very loving mother and father, and they see the father being like this, how the mother wants to be, and everything like this. It's easy for them to be like that because they've subconsciously seen it and then take notice of it, and this is how it is. So that's why, yeah, a lot of people aren't like that.
But we're talking to the people who are.
Ah,
When we talk about that, he feels like he might be getting it wrong, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So this is when the relationship can actually fall apart, not because either person's bad, because both of them were shaped by the things they learned long before they actually met each other. So if the man learns how to talk and feel, and the woman learns not to actually abandon herself, they can actually grow together. So but this is what you talked about before. If only one person learns, the relationship can break because it can't be all one and not the other.
yeah.
And it's not about blame, it's about understanding the story behind both of their behaviors before they come into the relationship.
And it's also a case of, like I say, you meet sort of in the middle.
Mm,
The woman has to also accept how the man is, just like the man is accepting how the woman is and all those emotional needs and everything like this. Whether it's a man, I don't need those emotional stuff. I don't need that. I can handle it quite well. Oh, I didn't know I had to think like that.
Yes, and it is. It's a learning and mirroring all the way through, which brings
Mm.
me into some questions that I wanted to get through about the heart of it, episode 3 that we're going on, and that is learning who you are beneath your conditioning. So that's why I wanted that sort of introduction to come in, and this is where, I'm going to fire some questions at you and go in a little bit further. So when you were actually growing up, what did you learn? What it was like to be a good man. What was that supposed to be like for you?
To be a good man was just to be loyal to those around you, your loved ones, to be the role model, um, to be the person that people could sort of rely on in the family as in when things need to be done. Um, Not so much nowadays. There's such a very uh, equalness. The woman can mow the lawns and the husband can do the dishes. That that
Yeah.
wasn't like that in those days. So it was a it was a setup without having to be talked about.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, because you sort of knew the models, so to speak.
Yeah.
So to be a good man was even sort of a role model, as you said. So what behaviors earned you approval or kept you out of trouble?
Well, just showing that I was respectful, showing that I wasn't degrading to anybody in any way, showing caringness and empathy and it didn't matter what level of empathy it was, just as long as it was you're okay, you're doing all right. Those things are very um, your parents really wanted you to be that type of person, so you became that sort of type of person because it was all about pleasing. Your
Mm.
parents are not knowing any different. If you've got really nice, caring parents and you're a psychopath, well, you're going to be a psychopath anyway. Um, you know,
So
uh,
it's got to do with what you talked about then was acknowledgement. So you're doing the empathy, but it's acknowledging the other person, which is that respect that you're talking about and that loyalty of showing that you're caring for that family people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what emotions were
A
you?
lot of unconditional love was implanted in those days.
I love that. So it's good to you can see where that comes from. So what emotions were you encouraged to show and which ones were you told to hide?
Well, you couldn't hide any sadness. You're a man. You're growing up to be a man, so all man aspects would come out. I can handle that. Oh no, that doesn't bother me. Whether it's emotional thing or whether it's a pain thing or whether it's something that somebody did to you or brush it off. We it was we prepared to defend if we had to defend in any kind of way. Yeah, it was all under the banner of you being a role model. You.
And so this is, this is sort of in childhood and growing up and doing that. And this is where the identity patterns form. So this, going back to that story that I mentioned earlier on, this is all the imprint that's happening before we even go into that relationship that happens down the track. So what I'm going into next is, some coping and some survival mode that people go into. So when, life got stressful, let's say, and what did you automatically do when life got stressful? Did you shut down, go quiet, get busy, go fix things, or avoid it?
Yeah, yeah. When things got stressful, you would just go on your own shell and be alone. I can't say this about everybody else, but in my situation, I was very I was very lucky to have my own bedroom. The girls had to have share bedrooms, and one had to share a bedroom with mother. But me being the only male, I had my own bedroom. And my own bedroom was my own cave, was my own hideout. Nobody could come into that bedroom. I would have a sign written up on my door: before entering this room, make sure you knock. If you hear nothing, don't come in, and all these sorts of things. And and that's where I spent a lot of time just thinking of to get away from the girls, to get away from all their friends or whatever, because you're a bloke, don't want bloody girls, when you're growing up young. As you get older, um, it's very easy for me to be in this situation where I can live in camper vans and not have a big house and not have the things that everybody else thinks they've got to have and everything, because right from word go. So just speaking for myself, yeah, it's so important to have that quiet time and to get away from all any emotional thing or anything that happened. I'll just go to my bedroom and I can think about it.
Yeah, which is like, where you are now. It's kind of like
Yeah.
in a bedroom as well. And it's because it's like, where were those habits that you incorporated when things got stressful or you just had to get away and you went and you go quiet and you didn't
Yeah,
set
and you resolve things in your head, whether you realise you did something wrong, you'd come out of that bedroom and then apologise, or something like that. You'd come out of that
so
bedroom
did
if
you,
they if they were in the wrong, you'd
were-
come out of the bedroom. You wouldn't get no apologies.
so, were those habits yours? Did you create those or did you copy them from someone in your family
No, as in the habits of what?
of going into your room and dealing with
Yeah, no,
in that?
no, that was all I knew. I wasn't, as I said, I grew up with girls that had they had their sharing bedrooms. I knew no different to have my own bedroom. I never had to share that in that sort of aspect. So I can't compare what it'd be like to have grown up and share a room with somebody. So I was very independent right from word go, and was able to think and have time to myself and correct whether I'm wrong or right and all
A
those
lot of
sorts of
time in the
things.
head. So did you ever feel like you had to be the strong one, even when you didn't want to be?
Yes, yeah, and that was a natural giving. That was a natural thing. Um, you know, as hard as it was, but you're a man. You're a boy, and again, for me, previously I've said that I've grown up with three sisters and stuff like this. I remember my softness was very soft. I only had female influences around me. Um, uh, but even then, I couldn't cry. I knew I couldn't cry, or I knew I couldn't, had to be like this, had to be like that, even though, I was quite soft. You know,
And well, this leads me into the next question. So you're sort of answering the next ones that I've got for you there, and it's kind of like the mask because you're like, this is, I was quite soft, but that necessarily wasn't the mask. But sometimes you may have had to put what we call the mask on. So there's next few questions where, like, if you look back, was there a version of yourself that you put on to get through things, like a role that you played?
yeah, the role all of us was forced to play isn't necessarily the role that we wanted to play, but we're born into having to play that particular role. Back then, you're born into it. Um, yeah, that's why we were so forced. People were so forced to suppress things like, I mean, like being gay or something like that. For those people that were like that, yeah, that had to be suppressed so much as well as a lot of other things. Your feelings, your emotions were suppressed, but couldn't show because that's sort of a man weakening.
And that was the mask that you had to put on
Yeah,
to play that role. So
yeah.
it's like,
I could only take that
did you
mask
ever
off in the
pretend that you,
bedroom.
I love that. So did you ever pretend that you were okay when you weren't?
Yeah. How you doing, mate? Yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah, no, 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 great. Fucking Jesus, I'm so pissed off about that. Again, that was
And you
another that
couldn't
was
share
another
that. You
mask.
had to,
No, no. I mean, things would come
yeah,
out for
yeah.
sure. Obviously, I wasn't the perfect child when it come to, retaliations from the things my sister's done or anything like this. That was also a learning process. You know, I won't say some of the things that I had to learn.
Maybe one day you might. But what parts of yourself did you hide because they were judged or misunderstood
Just
or
my
weren't
just
safe
my
to express?
emotions. The want anything that you didn't want to do that was expected of you to do. That was you had to have that front. That was a hiding front. You know, you couldn't hide. You, you had to hide the fact that there's things that I'm uncomfortable with, but I've got to do because I'm a male.
Mm. So what I'm going to go into is like the real you. So, underneath that role and underneath that mask. So if no one, needed anything from you, who would you be?
If no one needed anything from me, who would I be back then?
Yeah.
um, I'd be the person I love to do, and that was create. Right from word go, I've been a creator, whether it be plastic models, whether it be drawing.
Yep.
Um, at an early stage, I realised I couldn't be the person that has somebody to tell me what to do, show me what to do. I had to work it out for myself. So creating things myself, learning how to play music, learning how to read music to a certain point. Anything creative, anything learning. Um, am I falling away from the actual question?
No, 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 that's that because you went into the creative self, which is good and
Yeah,
sort of
that
that's sort of the inventive and invent
and that was my
creation.
getaway. That was my getaway. That was my getaway from thinking about things and stuff like that. As a kid building models, I'd get annoyed and pissed off at building models and everything like this. But that was okay because that was something that was created myself and not outside. That get me annoyed and
Yeah.
pissed off and stuff like this. I'd come home and realise Mum had vacuumed the carpet in my bedroom, and then I'd get really annoyed and pissed off because I knew where every little bit had fallen on the ground, every bit of model bit and stuff like
Uh,
this, because that was my domain. Even though I found it hard that I had to accept my mum coming in and cleaning my domain and vacuuming up model bits and stuff like this, and but that was
and
it.
this was
And you'd find, I think, you'd find a lot of blokes nowadays were like that in those days. You know, whether it be associating with the quick, but this, I've got to get away and go and play with my other mates to have a counteract of what I'm putting up with now.
Yeah. And so what do you actually want? Which was, I like to invent things, create things and build things, was separate from what you were taught to want.
Yeah, but you didn't know.
Oh.
You didn't know any better. You're going along, living a life, learning things, and getting annoyed at the opposite sex or whatever. So you just did that. I don't know what anybody else did, but I think the overall thing was for men. This is why we still go to the shed. This is why we still got to have our
Yes.
alone time, go to the shed, and whether it's stemmed from way back then, I don't know. Um,
So what
but
parts of your person
even your fathers will tell you that, oh, we're brought up hard and everything like this, so they suffered too,
Yeah.
you know. And the way they brought us up was a lot lenient than them because they learnt by that. The
Mm.
way I brought my son up was different to how I was emotionally brought up, but still to him, it might have been hard and everything like that. But his
So
next generation will be lighter again.
correct. So, what parts of your personality back then, what parts of your personality feel natural and not forced? Back then, what felt natural to you?
Just doing the things I love doing, and which might have been knocking around friends, surfing, getting skateboarding,
Adventure.
anything that could give you enjoyment, because that's what you strive for. You strive for enjoyment. Even nowadays, we would go towards enjoyment, then towards confrontation of anything. So
True.
yeah, mine was my bedroom, and if I didn't have my bedroom, I'd be out. And
So
yeah,
when did life, you go like, hey, you stop then. When did life stop feeling like it matched who you were inside? So basically, when did it start to align as in you didn't have to pretend?
in my teenager days, I guess. Um, yeah, in my teenage days, when you're old enough and you get your license, The whole world changes. Then you take yourself surfing, and that part of your life ruled over other parts of your life that were, as like a funeral, like a wedding. If there's a wave happening, that's more important.
And so when you got
Everything.
that license, that was like your freedom to the
That was,
world.
yeah, yeah.
And you sort of unlocked something in you which allowed that became more important than
And
the role that you were playing at home.
when I go back to when I was 14 and started crayfishing, that's when everything changed.
Yeah.
That's when I got me. That's when everything changed. That's when I got me freedom. Um, I got sufferings from it, but that's when everything changed. I became out of the house and all that sort of stuff. And the first thing I wanted to do was earn money and buy mum a washing machine or buy mum this or buy a car. The things that she never had, because still you've been brought up for that role model, you're a man and everything like this. Mum never had a
Providing.
husband, so I can now survive. I've watched her put up with years of doing it hard, and so yeah, car and all those sorts of things. And I could get into more detail about that, but
So that's where you went into your room and when you needed to get away from things, you had that creativity, that you had the freedom of your domain, and you could go and do things that were important to you in that section. So that kind of then grew when you got a
it
job
did.
as well as getting your license. And so therefore that's the moment where, you know, the what you did at the home and going to your domain changed because that wasn't you anymore. You had this whole freedom of world and work and money and direction to go in. So
But you know what? Also,
yes.
is being out on a fishing boat. I was totally away from land, totally away from everything that happened on land and stuff like that. When I was in my bedroom, the same thing. So my
Mm.
life really, and now I live in a camper van. So my life really has been all about being by myself on my own. From when I was in my bed, going to my bedroom, from when I was out fishing out in the sea, things would happen on land that I'm glad I wasn't a part of that, and all this sort of stuff with mates mucking up or whatever.
Yeah.
And even to now, got me alone time freedom back. And I guess that's the one thing that stemmed from all my life is that grasp of how great it is to be on your own, dependent, alone, your own decisions, your own self, and you can care for anybody else around you, and have empathy for anybody else around you, and be there for anybody else around you, because it's your own choice to do that, and there's no outside stoppages. Whether it be a wife or whether it be um, commitments to your environment or whatever like this that you chose to build around you.
This is beautiful, which leads me into my next last lot of questions for you, which is about your identity today. How would you describe the man that you've become now?
Oh my golly gosh.
I know,
Gee,
in a
Christ.
small, in a small, in a small.
I could answer a whole book on that, and then everybody else could answer a whole book on that on behalf of me.
But the man that you've become now because of all that, you sort of just touched on it
Yeah,
there.
yeah, that's right. The man I've come there so independently, and I love my independence. I love my own decision making. I love the fact that I've learnt by decisions I've made. Um, there's so much self learning, so much learning for yourself and for everybody else that happens because you're alone. Because you're by yourself. Because I'm not committed to anybody, and I'm surrounded by friends that are in those situations that have got the partner that are restricted from doing the things they want to do. I've never been in that situation. The only reason why I become restricted was because my dear old loving mother who had to put up with this was such a religious person. And back those days, that's how it was. Religious people, um, they had so much pride and self dignity back then, ruled your life also. You know,
Yeah.
couldn't do anything that might look like. And nowadays, you just see so many people that have got no self pride, no self dignity, no resilience. And I'm not being harsh or anything like that. It's just they don't see it themselves.
No.
And
And
that's the
yet you don't know
unfortunate
what you
thing.
don't know.
That's
So,
right.
what matters to you now that didn't actually matter 5 to 10 years ago?
5 to 10 years ago.
What matters to you now that doesn't matter, that didn't matter 5 to 10 years ago?
What matters to me now is having knowledge, is having unconditional love in the world, having power to be able to help people. Um, there's a whole lot of stuff. I could go into it and then forget what the question was again. Um,
And it's just about, what matters to you now that didn't matter
it's
5 to 10 years ago.
myself matters to me now, and who I've become and who I am. That's simple as this. And that, like, I'm I'm here for anybody and everybody. That's what I've become now. And to make people happy, to make people laugh is my goal. You know,
So
I don't,
that brings me into the next one, which is, what traits feel like the real you? And is that the trait that feels like the real you that's,
this
not
what I'm doing now is a trait that's a real me. Doing what I'm doing now, being able to take on anything I want to take on. Um, I'm at where I want to be now, to the point where people say to me, "What are you going to do when you get on the pension?" Well, I'll just get on the pension. I won't have the same amount of money as what I've got now, but I'll just get on the pension and that's it. So what? So in other words, I've avoided preempting paranoid situations, preempting. Oh gosh, there's nothing I can do but prepare myself for that. It's other than just be ready for it when it happens, accept it when it
and
happens.
that's acceptance, which is what you brought up. And so to summarize everything that not really summarize, but put into one sentence is that, I wasn't asking, about deep feelings here. We were touching on about emotions themselves, but not necessarily deep feelings at the beginning of this, and why men do what they do and how they've learned what they've learned because of the suppression that went on, as you've talked about today. And, I've been asking who you learn to be along the way and who you actually are when you're not having to try to survive those masks and role models.
Yeah.
And so have you been, and that's basically what we've done. So, and we've related it back to that story. So, for any final words, have you got anything else that you'd like to add from today's session?
No, other than it's very strong when people say believe in yourself. It's we've been lucky enough to be born in this planet not to please everybody else the way we think we have to, but we can please everybody the way we feel comfortable in doing whatever level that may be, whether you're a priest, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a doctor, or whether you're a psychology person, whether you're jack of all trades that's helped to do cashless jobs for older people, carers and all these sorts of things. Uh, and I'm there for anybody, and I try and convince people that what I'm able to do, you're able to do as well.
Hmm.
And I have succeeded in that. Whether it's a guy saying, "Oh, I can't do this," or "I can't even fathom doing that," and stuff like this. Tell them that you can, not just saying, "Oh, you can do that." Go on, I bet you can do it, or anything like this. You can do it. Just put your mind to it. Say it in a more deep emotional way, or whatever, like this, and they'll do it, and they'll be rapt that they can do it. And that's fantastic. I've showed that person something. You know, I've gone through life spending many years concentrating on a particular situation that's eventually after years become better and resolved itself and everything. And I feel great for taking my time out to help that person. It's great, it's
So it's showing that through your growth by going and helping another person help them grow is what brings you that essence of unconditional love and being here to help.
Yeah, yeah,
Great.
and that's what I love doing. Yeah, I
Lovely.
don't feel as though that's my purpose in role or anything like this. I feel absolutely comfortable and great doing that.
Correct. And this is the work you're here to do. So, on that note, this is the end of our episode 3, and we do hope that you can share this information to someone that might benefit from it, or you can subscribe to the channel as well. And I thank you, Chris and Bobby, of
Thank
course.
you.
He's not showing his face to us anymore. And they'll be along for the ride when we come to our next episode next week. And from then, we should be going live.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No
Cheers.
worries. See ya. Okay.